This is me. I bet you're probably wondering how I got into this situation. It all started several months ago when I was trying to wrap my head around complex numbers in class. The guy in front of me was playing chess, and the guy beside me was playing Tetris. It was in this moment that I had a realization that some of the best games that humanity has created prominently feature two things: extremely simple gameplay and squares. This epiphany got me thinking about a game taking place on a grid, with blocks that fall from all sides, with the player having to dodge them. I spent the remainder of class obsessing over this new idea instead of focusing on the thing that I should have been doing at that moment, like figuring out what the hell this is supposed to mean. In the subsequent hours, I cobbled together a basic prototype for what would become PentaZorg, the game I've spent the last few months working on. PentaZorg is kind of like a really simplified bullet hell. The main goal is to avoid touching these red squares for as long as possible. The longer your run lasts, the faster these red squares will fly at you. The main goal is to avoid the red squares for as long as possible and get the highest score you can. The rules for PentaZorg are as follows. This grey square is the player, and can be moved using the WASD and arrow keys. These red squares appear in randomly selected danger patterns. These danger patterns are made up of smaller subdivisions called danger frames. Touching these red squares will kill the player. These smaller black squares let the player know where the dangerous squares will be in the next danger frame. Going over an edge of the 5x5 grid will bring the player back out the other side, unless the edges are red, in which case the player will die. A timer will tick down. Once it reaches 0, the next danger frame will be brought forward and the timer will reset. With every danger frame cleared, the player's score is increased by 1 and the length of the timer will shorten slightly. And finally, pressing the spacebar will bring the next danger frame forward, allowing the player to play as quick or as slow as they want, kind of like the hard drop in Tetris. I usually go more in depth with the primary gameplay loop at this point in the devlog, but that really is the entirety of it. As I said, really simple gameplay. I guess I'll just tell you how I made the base systems. It's pretty jargony. If that doesn't interest you, you can just skip ahead. It's all timestamped as usual. I started making PentaZorg by creating the player movement, which I did by making two integer variables to represent the player's coordinates. Then, when input is received from the WASD keys or the arrow keys, those coordinates are changed up or down by 1, corresponding with the key pressed. For example, W and the up arrow key decrease the y-axis variable, and S and the down arrow key increase the value of the y-axis variable. And on the x-axis variable, that's A and left arrow to decrease, and D and right arrow to increase. Next, I made a 5x5 array, which we can call the player array. Then, taking those player coordinates from earlier, we can represent the player's position in the player array at those coordinates. The reason the controls are inverted is because the C# array defines 0, 0 as the top left corner of the array. So if the player were to start at the center of the grid, they'd be at 2, 2. So to move up on the y-axis, a decrease in the y variable is required. The danger patterns were created using 16 different 5x5 arrays, which we'll call the danger arrays. These describe the danger frames, as well as a 1x4 array, which we'll call the wall array. This stores whether the walls of the danger pattern are deadly, and an integer variable called frames remaining, which stores the number of frames left in the current danger pattern. Next, I created a timer that ticks down. Once it reaches 0, the advanced function is called. This causes each one of those 16 5x5 arrays to take the value of the array after it. So, array 16 feeds into 15, and 15 into 14, and 14 into 13, and so on and so forth. As well as resetting the timer, decreasing its length slightly, and decreasing frames remaining by 1. This continues until frames remaining is equal to 0. Once that happens, a new danger pattern is randomly selected, and the danger frame variables and frames remaining variable are reassigned values corresponding to their new randomly selected danger pattern. These are selected from a massive pile of variables defining each danger frame of about 242 danger patterns in total. Then, every frame we just render the player's position using a grid of grey squares with the 0 in the player array representing which squares not to render. Then, on top of that, we render the danger layer using a grid of red squares using the first of those danger arrays and the hazard information layer using the second of those danger arrays. Then, we just check if the player is occupying the same space in the array as any ones in the current danger frame, and if it is, the player gets a game over. Also, I should mention that pressing the spacebar causes the advanced function to be called, bringing the next frame forward as discussed in the game rules earlier. I'm quite sorry if that explanation made absolutely zero sense. I was trying to compress several months worth of spaghetti code into interpretable speech, but anyway, ad hoc ad astra. Once I had these systems in place, I set about creating a multitude of danger patterns to increase the variety of each run. Once I had a good amount of danger patterns, I started showing the prototype to some of my friends, and I got some pretty good feedback. Two of my more musically talented friends, Gunk The Janitor and The Rat, both offered to help me out with music for the game. I'd done some messing around in FL Studio beforehand though, and I'd kind of already found a sound that I thought fit the game well as the main theme. So instead of all of us working on one whole track for the game, we thought, what if we have a bunch of selectable tracks and alternate visual aesthetics to go along with them? I think this was the best way of doing it, because this way Gunk and The Rat were able to create whatever they wanted without any restrictions on their creativity. And I had already considered doing alternate aesthetics for the game, but this decision was really what brought it all together. I made the main theme of PentaZorg using my usual methods, that being bumbling around on FL Studio until I've made something vaguely music-esque, before deciding to use Hardkick 04 and Electric 5 for the instruments. The same two instruments I use for all of my game soundtracks, except for that one, but we don't talk about that one. Anyway, this is what the main theme sounds like. After I'd made the main theme, I thought I should make a custom font for the game, and possibly a logo as well. All my previous games have used one of two fonts, either the basic Arial font that comes preloaded with Unity, or this pixel art font that I got off the asset store. I thought it'd be cool if I made all the characters for this font out of a 5x5 grid to remain consistent with the game, so it's all connected, you know? I've tried using a bunch of different tools for font generation in the past, but all of them had paywalls or several hundred pages of legal stuff, and I'm not a copyright lawyer, I'm a cheapskate. I opted to just stick with what I know and make the characters as meshes in Blender. This definitely wasn't the most efficient method of doing this, and it was a massive pain for the UI design later, but now the game has a recognizable font of its own. I also made a logo using this font. The main symbol I used for this logo is similar to a dangerous square with a hazard square on top of it, with a large angry Z on top of that. The way I came up with the name for this game was just combining the prefix penta, because the game takes place on a 5x5 grid with some other nonsense stuck on the end that I thought sounded cool. Just on a tangent, it turns out that in Dutch, Zorg apparently means concern, which is entirely coincidental but fits the game quite well. After I'd finalized my track and gotten all the font and logo business in order, I posted the first version of the game to itch.io. Once that was done, the plan was to make more danger patterns and add the alternative visual aesthetics and soundtracks, and then release that version of the game along with this devlog. The first aesthetic that I worked on was the one for Gunk's song, titled Various Doohickeys and Assorted Knickknacks, which goes off like a frog in a sock. Let it roll! As I said, like a frog in a sock. So, Gunk, what inspired this piece?
Yeah, that's about it.
So, this song was breakcore, which is a musical genre I wasn't massively familiar with. My only real experience and knowledge about it came from being friends with Gunk. So, to create the corresponding aesthetic for this track, I immersed my head in the all-over-the-place busted CRT aesthetic that is breakcore, and I took a bit of inspiration from some breakcore album covers and the cover art of various doohickeys and assorted knickknacks and created this aesthetic. I created the neon polygon messes by just taking a cube in Blender, adding a few loop cuts to it, then just randomly distorting its vertices to get the necessary jagged edges. Then I just put this into Unity and placed them randomly all over the scene. I made this text and several different variations of these eyes freehand in MS Paint, similar to the song's SoundCloud cover art. I decided on a split complementary color scheme of blue, green, and magenta. I chose this color scheme because all the colors contrasted really well in gameplay, and it seemed to be a common color scheme in the album covers of this genre of music. I then added some post-processing with bloom, film grain, chromatic aberration, and lens distortion to make everything look like it's happening on a TV that was made in 1996. I then made all the components strobe to match the song's general vibe. Once that was done, I moved on to the Rat song, which was a remix of the main theme. So, the Rat, what inspired this piece?
So the two main things that I wanted to emphasize on this track to embrace the upbeat but intense and frantic energy were constantly swapping between 7/8 and 6/8 time signatures to keep the listener on their toes, much like PentaZorg's gameplay, and adding layers of texture, so like multiple synths playing the same line and sort of just like phasing between them, which is why the excerpt that just played is my favorite part of the track, because you can just hear everything all at once, but you can still like hear every single detail.
I really felt that this song had a strong sense of forward motion to it, so I started by attempting to create a starry skybox, which I haven't really done before. I won't go into too much detail on how I made it because there was a bit of messing around in Blender's shader nodes. All my other games have extremely janky skyboxes, and they're a thing I've wanted to learn how to do for ages, and finally figuring them out was like a massive revelation. Once I had the starry skybox in place, I added some particles that fly towards the camera, creating some Star Wars hyperdriveness. I then thought it would be cool if there were some asteroids and other interesting things the player could fly past. So I created some asteroids using Blender's rock generator. I thought the polygon count was too high, so I converted them to meshes before using the decimate modifier to give them the low poly style I was after. I then duplicated them a bunch and randomly dispersed and rotated them around to make these clumps of asteroids. I then made these angry space triangles. I'm not entirely sure what they do or why they're floating in space, but what else is an angry space triangle supposed to do? I also made this city carved into the face of a massive asteroid, which I made using the same asteroid generation methods I talked about earlier, but I didn't lower the polygon count as much to preserve a bit of the detail. I then just used a boolean modifier to slice a flat surface into the asteroid. I then just randomly placed extruded cubes around the flattened surface before using another boolean modifier to cut some neon bars into them. I decided to use a contrasting blue and orange color scheme for this aesthetic. I only used glowing orange as an accent on some of the stars and angry space triangles, and went with dark blue and cyan for everything else. I tried to create a good sense of scale in this aesthetic by having a variation in object sizes from small to gargantuan, as well as making the particles more resemble dust that flies past you as you approach Mach 10. The third aesthetic I worked on was UberZorg, which was designed to be a visualizer for the main theme. There wasn't really much to it other than the base aesthetic, but with bloom and this thing, which I like to call the thumper. The thumper doesn't do much else other than punctuate each beat of the kick drum. I synchronized the track and the thumper to each new danger frame to try and tie everything in the game to that steady driving pulse of the beat. The final aesthetic I worked on was inspired by Synthwave. Now, I've been in love with Synthwave for years. A bunch of games in my Steam library have Synthwave inspired art styles. The primary method I use when programming involves putting on Synthwave and getting lost in that neon haze, to the point now where I can only see in magenta and cyan. I'm not joking, this is a cry for help. I created a synthwavy version of the main theme before making the first version of this aesthetic, which is absolute garbage and I hate it, because synthwave's all about forward motion, man, and getting lost in that neon blur. So I completely scrapped it and started again. For the new version, I decided to emulate the driving into the sunset that you can see in lots of synthwave art and album covers. I created a new skybox with a sunset in the distance and the angry space triangles from earlier. I thought it would be cool if, as the player cruised along, these pylons would spawn in with this scale effect. Yet another mysterious thing floating around with a purpose I'm not entirely certain of. I made it so that as you're playing, more highway and pylons spawn in over time, but stop if you die. That pretty much covers all of the aesthetics for the game. Moving on to the UI. For the game's user interface, I really wanted to try and get it as sleek and as polished as possible, as the UI in all my other games is absolutely awful, and for this one I wanted to get it as professional as I could. You know how earlier I said that I just created each individual character as its own mesh in Blender, and it was a massive pain for UI design later? Well yeah, because I wasn't using TextMesh Pro or an actual in-engine solution. I couldn't just type out what I wanted for a line of text. I had to manually place each letter. But once I had all that done, I added this little font effect, so whenever a menu is changed, all the lines go zoop, just to make it feel a bit more alive. I added menus to select the different aesthetics and songs, as well as a credits page, which was new, as this was the first time where it's been more than just me in the credits. Also, you can select how fast you want the game to be when you start. I'd recommend speed level 1 for the true PentaZorg experience, 2 if it's your first time playing, and 3 or 4 if you just want to relax. I think that's everything. You can check the game out on itch.io. I should inform you though that it will only be the base aesthetic in the browser version. The alternate tracks will still be there, but just because the alternate aesthetics are probably going to not run the best in the browser version. I'm thinking as of right now I could release this game on Steam and maybe mobile, but that's a whole other can of worms and I'm pretty exhausted, so I might do that in the future. The link for the game will be in the description, as well as all of the links for Gunk and the Rat's SoundClouds and Instagrams, Twitters, YouTube channels, all the links to their music videos for the songs. Also, as of late, I have started an Instagram and Twitter account, which I've been using to post updates on the game, as well as other art stuff that I make that doesn't really fit in a video or a game. So you can check that out, or don't. Actually, if you don't want to go on Twitter, I wholeheartedly support that decision. Good for you. Please continue not using Twitter. To Gunk and the Rat, I'm really grateful that I got to work with such amazing and talented musicians on this project, and thanks for helping me out with the music, guys. I think that's everything. The description for this video is just going to be a wall of blue text. Anyway, sorry I haven't uploaded in months. Thank you for watching my video, and I will see you later.